Welcome to Easy macOS Management. I'm Nate Walck. I work at Facebook as a systems engineer. So one of the things that we hear a lot is how do we get started with Chef? It's this config management tool, but what do you do to even get going with it? Here's a link to our repo on GitHub, and we have a quick start guide on there. So if you're interested in trying it out, you can go to that URL, Wi-Fi willing, and clone down the repo, and there's some steps that I'm actually going to walk through at the end of this. So if you want to follow along, you can, preferably in a VM, unless you like to live dangerously, as I do. And we can go from there. So let's look at some of the things that you need to understand to be able to use our Chef API cookbooks. One of those things is attributes. Attributes are data that's used to tell Chef what you want applied to a machine or what state you want the machine in. So let's assume nobody here has any Ruby knowledge at all. There are two major data structures you need to know about to use attributes. The first one is hashes, known as dictionaries in other languages, and then arrays, which are also lists in Python if you're more familiar on the Python side. Let's go briefly over each one and what it looks like in the context of Chef attributes. So hashes are a key value pair, and this is how you assign a value to a Ruby hash. So you can see there's a key, there's a value, but let's step through what's happening here. So we have a node object, and the node is the machine that Chef is running on. So we have node, and it's using the default precedence level in order to set this value. Now don't worry about what default precedence is, it's not really all that important. The only thing to remember is to use node.default when setting these things. And I'll explain why in a bit. The value inside these square brackets is the key name we're setting. The key is just the name of key. It's in single quotes. And single quotes tell us that it's a string. This could be in double quotes as well, or in Ruby, you can store a string in another object, like a variable or whatever. You could pass that in as well, and that would be equally valid. Finally, we're setting the key to be equal to value, which is also a string. This lets us describe what we want our machine to look like. So let's give some good practical examples here. So my node would love to have some funnel cake. So we'll set funnel cake to true, and it's a Boolean, so it's just true. And that's how it looks in Ruby. For my node, the bacon preference is Kunzler bacon, which is of course amazing. Hashes can also be nested, meaning one hash can contain another hash or a hash of hashes or as much inception as you want to do. And it can get confusing, but we use this to organize the settings and make it easier to understand exactly what's going on. So here we have a key of Passenger, which is my favorite coffee shop in Lancaster. And it contains a hash of coffee. So we know that Passenger has coffee. You know, it's true that Passenger has coffee. Passenger also has tea. That's also true. Very good tea. But they don't have iPads. Now, there's people there that have iPads, but they don't sell iPads. You know, we'd have to go to an Apple store to get iPads. When it comes to using our API cookbooks, there's a few things to keep in mind. As I alluded to earlier, you know, you always want to set your attributes in a recipe. It's extremely important. And only the person who wrote the API cookbook should set attributes in the default attributes file. This file is used to scaffold or outline what it is that the cookbook does. So that data, if you mess with it, it could have unintended consequences. So when I say API cookbook, we'll see a couple examples of those later. But basically, it's like if you have CP Screensaver, don't mess with the attributes in CP Screensaver. Change them in your own company's recipe file. Always also use node.default. The reason for this is there's 6 different levels you could use and many different contexts, and it's really confusing. This is what it looks like. You have these different levels and these different places they can be, and it's just confusing. There's 15 different possibilities. So we just sidestep that. It's just confusing. It's technically awesome, but I'm not that clever, and I get confused when I start doing stuff like that. So I just don't even bother. Just stick to node.default, and your life will be a lot easier. It's easy to use these and try to be clever with it, but you'll paint yourself into a corner, and you won't realize it until you have a big hole to dig yourself out of. All right, so that's attributes, but where do they go? Company init is in our example repo, and we have it arranged in such a way that you can put all your company's settings into this file. And we have the run list structured such that all the API cookbooks are already there. Everything's included, but they don't do anything until you put data in here. So for instance, say you want to set the desktop wallpaper on your machine. You would go into CP init, recipes, company init, and then you would set the desktop override picture path to whatever picture you want. I'm just using a built-in one because it's something that comes with macOS, and you could just literally copy and paste this into our example and get the desired result. So here, it's the API cookbook we're using is CP desktop. The key is override picture path. And this key is actually what's used by the system to set the picture itself. And we're using this key because if we would rename it, it would be a little bit more confusing, because then when you go to look on the system, it would be different from what we're actually using in the cookbook. So we try to keep it about the same, so that if you know how to do it using defaults, you should be able to do it in the cookbook just fine. And then, as I said before, Colorburst 2, it ships with macOS, and it's just something that's available. If you were to run this, it would essentially instantly change the background for that user if they were logged in. So you'd set this, push it out to your fleet, their background would now change to that picture because it's using Apple's methods on the back end. So let's look at a couple more API cookbooks. We can get to the dessert here while we're food themed. CP preference panes is used to disable preference panes in the system preferences. So let's say we want to disable a couple, and that makes them grayed out and inaccessible. So we'll feed it a list of which ones we don't want people to get to. So for instance, we have desktop screensaver, desktop screen effect, which is the desktop settings. We have iCloud, and we have configuration profiles. So if we're installing profiles, we don't want them to disable them. If we're using iCloud, we don't want to have people, getting data off of our systems. That's just no good. So it's not installed yet. So as you can see, we have just Screensaver profile installed, nothing else. And you can see in preference pane, nothing's grayed out. So everything's just great. All right, so we're going to take this, sorry, one back here. We're going to actually run chef. So we're going to save that, run chef. And you'll see that the profile, sorry about that. A little bit too twitchy. The profile is installed now. You have preference panes profile installed. If you look at system preferences, they're grayed out, but it's a little bit hard to see. So let me highlight those there. Those three are grayed out. So that's great. We disabled those preference panes. They're grayed out. Nobody can get to them now. But what if we actually want them to get to the desktop? With many other things, if you were to deploy a setting like this and want to remove a setting, you'd have to now go and delete it off of every single machine and keep that code there indefinitely. But instead, we'll just remove that one line. You see remove desktop screen effect. It's now gone. And then if we rerun chef, desktop and screensaver is now accessible again. And we don't have to clean up any code. We don't have to go back and fiddle with the old machines that have old settings. It's always keeping them in line with what the current configuration is. Screensaver is another great example. The defaults on macOS are 300 for idle time and 2 for delay. So we're going to, this is 300. So we're going to do that. And the default is actually 600. So we're going to do an idle time of 300 to change it. So this is what it looks like as default. It's 600 seconds. Password delay is 0. We're going to change that, give it a little bit longer of a delay. So if you accidentally hit the hot corner or whatever, you can just wiggle your mouse and get it back. And then also a little bit shorter idle time, so that it can't just sit there waiting for someone to jello you or whatever. So if we run it, it will now change it to a password delay of 2 seconds and an idle time of 300 seconds instead. So let's look at power management. This is another it's a really long namespace. It's like a lot of stuff, but let's just go through it, left to right. This does settings. You can manage settings either while it's on AC or while it's on battery. It'll do both, and they're each their own separate settings. So if you look at it left to right, it's power management cookbook. It's on AC. System sleep timer 60. While it's on battery, it's 30. Just a little bit lower so that we don't drain battery so much. For Spotlight, say there's some code that you don't want Spotlight indexing or any large folder of individual files tends to make Spotlight go crazy. So I always exclude my code directory. So if you set the code to this, you just do Spotlight exclusions and append that path into it. It will add it to the UI right there, and you can see it's now excluded. So when you go to use Spotlight, it'll no longer index that folder. We can also, I believe we can also add things to be indexed intentionally, but this is exclusions, and we use it for code and a lot of stuff like that. Anything that would typically make a Spotlight go a little bit crazy. So for CP Bluetooth, does anybody here use dashboards or you know, like lobby machines or kiosks or anything like that with Macs? Yes, so that's the pain in the butt. You know, somebody walks by with like someone has a desk near it even, has a Bluetooth keyboard, this will pop up right away and you know, just ruin the whole experience if you have like a video looping or whatever. So here it's CP Bluetooth, and you do Bluetooth AutoSeek keyboard 0 and Bluetooth AutoSeek pointing device 0. And what that does is it no longer looks for keyboards or mice. It'll just stay headless and not display any pop-ups asking you to pair a device. PathsD is for managing your system path. So say you have custom tooling for your company or custom binaries, and you want everybody to be able to access them when they open terminal. This is what you would use. You take the path. In my case, I have opt8 bin, and I have whatever binaries I've made in there, and I've added it to PathsD. If I were to add that and run chef, the result would be this. I could echo my path, and you see there's the default system paths, and then it automatically gets appended to the end. So we won't mess with any Apple stuff, but we still get to shunt our custom stuff in there and make it available. Hosts is another one that we tend to work with. And a lot of the times, we have developers that will have local machines, but they want the DNS to resolve for it. So they'll set up custom entries like this. So you want example.com to go to 1.2.3.4, or you want 2 different domains to go to those. If you were to apply that, run chef, it would show up in your Etsy host file just like this. So you'd have the IP address and then the DNS names that you wanted to basically hijack and use those instead. So CPLaunchD, everybody here, I'm sure, has worked with LaunchDs at some point or another. And one of the problems that we've always had is you have a LaunchD, you add it to your machines, it runs great, but if you ever need to remove it, you need to remember to go delete it. And if a machine's off network when you delete it, it will never get it deleted. It'll always be there. So what we do with CPLaunchD is you can add the LaunchD into this, and it will put it down. And then the moment you remove it from the chef code, it'll automatically unload it and delete it from disk for you. So you don't have to do any of the cleanup. It's just magical auto cleanup, which is great if you intend to do it, not great if you don't intend to do it. So here's an example of what this would look like. This one's a little bit more complicated. This is a hash and a hash. I think it's only 2 deep. But I'll show you what it looks like. So here's LaunchD, and the name of the LaunchD is some script. That's the key name. That key is going to contain another hash. So we use curly braces to describe that. And inside that hash, this is going to start looking familiar. You'll have program, which is the program key in the launch statement, and then the path to whatever it is that that launch statement is running. Another key we might have is the start calendar interval, which is another hash. It's you can see the curly braces. So we're going to store more information in there. And for this, it's weekday 7, which is Sunday. Could also be 0. Hour is 10, so it'll run at 10 in the morning every Sunday. And this is exactly mapped one-to-one to LaunchD's and the LaunchD plist format. We'll also do a timeout. Maybe it's a long-running thing and you don't want someone to get really angry at you because it's eating all their resources. So this will kill it after 300 seconds. So this is what it looks like in a chef hash. It looks, it's 2 deep. Some script contains the hash, which contains a hash. But all these keys and values are exactly analog to what we have over here in the plist itself. So if you were to save it, put it down, this is precisely what it looks like. So some script, which is the key name we saw, is right here. It automatically appends all this stuff in the beginning for you, so you don't have to worry about it. It gives you your domain and tells you it's managed by chef. The program key and the value of that, library, some script right there. the start calendar interval, hour 10, weekday 7. So it has all the information generated for you. You only need to manage it in Chef that way. And then it also has the timeout, exactly 300 seconds. So every single key is correlated. Every single key is mapped one-to-one. So it's almost identical to what you've ever dealt with launch statements. It's just in a slightly different format with, curly braces instead of all the tags. But it's at its heart, it's exactly the same data. So CPChrome's another another fun one. So Nick loves managing browsers, web browsers. So he decided to make CPChrome to make it a little bit easier. This manages Chrome as per their documentation and their specification. So for instance, if you want the bookmark bar to show by default, you'd say in the CPChrome API Cookbook, set bookmark bar enabled to true. Perhaps you want to make sure that all Chrome installs have a specific extension. You can do that as well. So you give it the Chrome extension update URL, which this is pretty standard here. But it might be hard to find. So here it is. This is the URL that they use. And if you use this, anything that you would get an update for through the Chrome Web Store would work as usual. And then here's the Chrome install force list. And that string is the identifier for it, which is really confusing, and I kind of hate that. But it's for LastPass, trust me. And this makes sure that LastPass is installed on any machine that has Chrome installed and is running Chef. So what about things that you don't want installed? There's many extensions that are pretty nasty. So Better History is a good example of that. You can also blacklist extensions just by using that identifying number. And when you do that, nobody will be able to install it. If they had it installed, it'll disable it. And you can, rest at ease knowing that your fleet isn't being actively exploited by that particular extension, at least. We've made a lot of progress over the last year and a half now, it's been. And we have more API cookbooks, and there's other people in the community that are using Chef. Eric Gomez is a great example. His Pinterest cookbooks just got released on Wednesday, so those are all up there. And I'm actually going to do, I never do live demos because the demo gods hate me, but let's do it.
Living on the edge.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes. And I am going to clone it from the internets. Because why not? All right, so the first thing we're going to do is, I'm just going to go through this quick startup guide, as was linked earlier. Does anybody need that URL again?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not coming out right.
Oh, gotcha. Let's see. Why does it hate me? Here we go.
If you Google Facebook Chef, it comes up. Or GitHub Facebook Chef.
Yes. It does work. Cool. So I'm actually being just a little bit lazy here. I do have them all here. So you can just go to this URL, and if you go to the main page, you'll just dig into Chef here, and you'll have the full path at the top. And it's the same as the bit.ly URL. But we'll go through the quick start. I'm going to literally copy and paste this stuff because I couldn't be bothered to type it. All right, we're going to clone this down. Hope for the best. I'm even on Wi-Fi. I'm not using wired. No, nobody got time for that. And then we'll go into that directory. So we're cloning this down. It puts it into users shared ITCPE. So we're going to hop into there. And if we do an ls, we can see all the cookbooks are there, and we're ready to start customizing.
Can you make that full screen?
Yes, thank you. I forgot. I'm going to get out of frame here just for you. Yeah, there we go. All right, so let's make this bigger. Good? Goodish?
Much better.
Okay, good. See if we can get this side by side. Man, it's raining. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit this company init file right here. Oof. All right, I'll highlight it. Contrast here. All right, so if you go into users shared ITCPE and then Chef, which is the main folder with all our stuff in it. We're going to be migrating this over to another repo. That's a little bit less, nesty, but this is what we have at the moment. And then if you go into the cookbooks folder, CPLaunch. CPLaunch is the main cookbook that we run. So when you run Chef, it includes CPLaunch. CPLaunch includes literally everything else. So if you look at this list of cookbooks here, these are all included in CPLaunch. You don't have to do that yourself. It's already there in the example. And these cookbooks don't actually do anything unless you set attributes like we were showing earlier. So we're going to do that right now. Let's go to CPLaunch, recipes, and then company init. And company init is where you would put all your company's customizations and attributes. So let's open that up. This is recipes. Init. Cool. Ooh. There we go. Cool. So let's scroll down a little bit here, and you'll see there's my company in all caps. And that's what we're going to replace. This is what Chef uses when it installs launch statements. Mine was set to like macOS DevOps or something like that. But if I were to run Chef right now, it would set all the prefixes for the profiles and launch statements as my company, all caps, yelling at you for no reason. So we're going to change that. I'll change these over to macOS DevOps. I know I don't own the domain for that, so don't go there. All right, cool. So we changed all three of those. You can do a find and replace if you want. I just replaced them manually. So what we're doing here is we're setting organization to macOS DevOps. And what that does is this is referenced in every API cookbook that we've made and in every API cookbook that Eric made at Pinterest. So if you put your company name in there, any cookbook you will use will brand all the settings correctly. So ours is set to Facebook, for obvious reasons. And but whatever you set it to, it will name it correctly and set all launch statements using the correct domain. So we have that set. That's all done. What's next? I can't remember.
Can we ask questions now?
Yes. If it's about this very thing, yes.
Yes. Catch box. So I saw at least 4 places that had my company. Why not use a variable?
You could, if you want to be tricksy. There's no good reason for it. It's just how it was. Yeah, and I think the other reason was we were trying to make it so that we didn't have to worry about variable interpolation and all that stuff, from the get-go. So it's just that way for this example, but we only set it in one place, to answer your question. So you could definitely do that. If you have Ruby chops and you know how to do all that stuff, go at it. It's great. All right, so we've edited company init. We're now back into the main Chef directory, which has quick start JSON in it. And this command will run Chef locally. We're not doing server-based because if you want to do a Chef server, it's a whole other talk, maybe even a whole other workshop. So we're just going to run it locally. So you could very well have all these cookbooks locally on your machine and just have a script that runs this and then uses the local cookbooks and then update the cookbooks with like Monkey or Jamf or whatever you feel like. That would totally be valid. But this is just for the purposes of exploring Chef. So we'll go ahead and run Chef. If I can type my password. Oh, I don't have Chef installed. That's a problem, isn't it? This is how we debug documentation. We do it live. No, I actually just didn't even read it. See, past Nate knew this. Future Nate forgot already. Oh. Oh. Sorry, I'm a shy typer.
Pressure's on.
There we go. It's not a strong password, don't worry about it. No, it's literally, it's not a strong password. Okay, so now we can actually run Chef. It's throwing some warnings because we're using a local config file. Chef likes you to use the server, especially since they sell server service. But we can ignore that, so don't worry about the warns. We're also on Chef version 13, which is the newest, and I'll be honest, I haven't updated a lot of this since that was released. So if you see some really scary warns and fatals, yeah, just ignore them. Generally not good for real, but it's okay here. All right, so this cookbook is actually not working quite properly. It should not install anything if we don't have anything set, but this is something we'll fix, so that's a known issue. So let's go ahead and customize this stuff. And we'll do Screensaver. Actually, let me read the documentation because I should probably listen to that. All right. Right, so we're gonna edit CP recipes, company init. And I'm just gonna arbitrarily put it just below the company stuff here. So just like that. And we'll start putting some settings in here and see what happens. All right, so we'll do the screensaver idle time to 300. We'll just drop that in there and save it. So now that that is set, we have API Cookbook CP Screensaver, idle time, value is 300 seconds. And when we run Chef, it should apply that. But before we run Chef, let's just keep me honest here. The current profile has it at 600 seconds for idle and pass-through delay of 0. So if we run this, and this doesn't update live, so I do have to close that. This is where I normally go check, Facebook or whatever, but okay, there we go. So it ran. All right, it's at 300 seconds now and 0. So if we were to delete that, it would just go right back to what it was. Oops. Right back to what it was, which is the default. So it goes back and forth, however you want it. Whatever it is in this cookbook is what it will be on your machines when Chef runs, even if that means reverting to the default. So if this was working correctly, I would delete that line. It would no longer manage the screensaver at all. But we do have a bug report in for that. I think someone yelled at us on the pull request. I can't remember. Probably Alistair.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I noticed that you put it under the My Company
Yes.
settings. Wouldn't it be under the system screensaver one for?
Oh, in here? Yes, so what we'll do is, so the CP Screensaver cookbook has its own set of files, but we don't touch those. Those are basically, they're an API. So basically, it's the thing that you use, but you don't actually modify it directly. So if you were to use a library or a module or anything else from any other piece of code, it's generally bad to edit their code. You want to stay in your own sandbox. So our sandbox is company init. And if you run into issues with it, you yell at them, which is nice, because if you edit their code, you can't yell at them, because then they'll be like, you messed with my code, what's going on? But yeah, so with CP Screensaver, you can yell at us, which might be a benefit, and you can say, what the heck, this isn't working, and then we'll look at it. But yeah, basically you want it to be in company init. That's where the file lives. But by putting it in here as such, it really is putting it in CP Screensaver. So even though it's not physically present in the CP Screensaver file, when Chef runs, it takes all this stuff and squashes it down together and merges it. So whatever's in there, which is a black box as far as we're concerned, we don't care, we're just putting our idle time in there. And then when that happens, the cookbook says, oh, hey, we're managing a setting, and then it generates the profile and installs it for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Yes.
So how do you know what all options or attributes you can set? Like if I download that, but I'm only supposed to be editing the company init file, how do I know what I can touch and control and modify?
Very good question. If we're nice, which we try to be, if you go to the cookbook itself, we normally have these pretty README files, and we try to list every single attribute that's available, and then give you an example of how to use them. So we're trying to set a precedent here for how this is documented. If you look at other Chef code, they're not so nice a lot of the times. So normally you have to dig through the code and figure it out. But it really depends on the project you're looking at. But we're kind of, with the API cookbooks, we're setting a standard of how it's arranged, how it functions, and also how it's documented. And I know Eric's are probably better documented than some of ours even. But he just released a whole bunch of really cool ones. All right, where were we on the... Off track here. There we go. Back to the quick start. Sweet. So I showed you the launch D. This is a little bit simpler one. We'll do this one just as a, just to take a look at it. It's kind of cool to see it get loaded and unloaded automatically. So let's give that a go. So we'll edit this. This is company init. And we'll just put this right below the other one. And this is a name if it does nothing, or it does nothing. And then it echoes nothing as a program. And it does run it load. So if we set that and save it, run chef. Actually, before we do that, let's look in launch daemons. There's nothing called does in there. And then we're going to run it. And what this will do is it'll lay down the launch daemon on disk, and then it'll load it for you. And likewise, as I'll show you, when you remove those lines, it'll actually unload the launch daemon before deleting it off of disk, which is nice because has anybody deleted a launch daemon without unloading it first? Isn't it great? It used to be worse. It's better now, but it's still great to have ghost launch daemons flying around until reboot. All right, so now if we do the same grep, we have com.macosdevops.chef.doesnothing.plist, and if we do launch control, sudo launch control, list, and it's there. So we have it. And then if we want to go the other direction, we can do that. We'll just delete that out. We'll save it. Oh no. Yeah. Cool. And then we'll run chef again. And then, as you'll see, when you do launch control list again and grep for it, it won't be there, and it will be missing from disk. So it'll just kill it for us and kill it in the best way possible. Sweet. All right, so that's the quick start. But now let's go over here, because Eric has some interesting and intriguing things that we can do, like application access. And this is going to be useful because when you want to add another cookbook from outside of our repo, it's a little bit confusing. So I'll walk through that so you can see exactly what steps you need to make to add your own and add external things. So not loaded. Does not exist on disk. So we're back to where we were. Launch daemon's gone, no longer echoing nothing for us, which is utterly worthless anyways. So we're going to go here, and we're going to clone Eric's. Do you need the link for Eric's? I have that down at the end here. Here we go. It's a bit.ly Pinterest CPE. Yeah, it's a little bit hard to see. Here we go. So Pinterest CPE. And then if you search GitHub, it's there as well. His is actually flat. So when you go to his cookbooks directory, they're just all in the root. They're not nested like ours are. It's a little bit easier to work with. So what we'll do is we'll go to his repo. It's Pinterest/ITCP cookbooks. And we're going to grab that so we can clone it, Wi-Fi willing, which has been great and working super well. I'm going to clone this to my desktop, because why not? And then we'll do ITCP cookbooks. Cool. And then we're going to open that. Sweet. So this is Eric's cookbooks here. And then we're going to open our current, this is the one that I cloned from ITE, Facebook ITCPE. And in our folder here, you have chef and then you have cookbooks, and then in cookbooks is where all our cookbooks live. If you want a cookbook to be added to your config, it needs to go into the cookbooks folder, and then you need to do two things. We use init as the entry point for everything, so it makes it nice, because we can tell init all the dependencies up front. So in init, well, let's copy it over first. We're going to do application access. We'll copy that over, copy paste. Of course, I put it in the wrong place. No. That's not what I wanted either. This is a prime example of why humans are bad, because we don't do things accurately every time. But having code helps us out. There we go. All right, so we have application access in there. We don't really need to care what is in here at all, actually. We just need to make sure it's in our Cookbooks directory. And then we'll reference Eric's code README doc when we're ready to use it. So to get ready to use this, we're copying it in. We're going to go to CP init. And then within CP init, there's a metadata.rb. And what metadata says is there's a couple different things in metadata. We can take a look at it. But more or less, it's the name of the cookbook, who maintains it, who to yell at when it breaks. You're welcome, that email won't work. License, a description of it, and a version. We always do our version at 0.1.0 because we don't actually version our cookbooks outside of Git. All our cookbooks are versioned in Git. We don't rev these versions because it just gets confusing with how Chef works. But that's related to Chef server, so we'll just skip over that for now. So here you'll see a bunch of different cookbooks. Eric's cookbooks are also API cookbooks, so we'll sort them under API cookbooks here. And when you put in depends, what it's saying is CP init depends upon this list of cookbooks. I can't even remember the name of it. There we go. And we'll add it there. And then, because some people might have OCD, put it up there. Okay, there we go. So we have application access. It's now established that if you want to use init, init requires application access to exist. We've placed it into the cookbooks directory, so it exists. It is there, but now CP init needs to know that it requires that, and now it does. So we'll just save that out and close it. And there's only one other place you need to add that, and that is in init default. Recipes, macOS. There we go. So this is the default init for all macOS machines. So any macOS machine that runs will load this. And if we look in this, can't change the directory to it, but if we look in this, it's going to be complicated. It's going to look confusing, but don't worry about it. What we'll do is look for API cookbooks yet again. There's API cookbooks. They go last. There's a reason for that. It's complicated. But we will put it in here. So we have a couple different cookbooks. For Eric's cookbooks, he does base some of his work on the CP Profiles cookbook, which is at the bottom here. So the one gotcha is don't just put it at the bottom because you might run into some fun issues. So always put it after the beginning one there, towards the front of the run list. In fact, you could just chuck it in the front of the run list, and that would probably be the safest thing to do. So let's just do that. There we go. So we now have it in init. So what this does is init actually loads this cookbook and says apply this cookbook to the machine. But because of the way the cookbook is, it doesn't actually apply any configuration because there's nothing set. So if there's nothing set, it includes it, says there's nothing to do, moves on with his life. Goes on. All right, so that's all set. Application access is ready to go. But how in the world do I use this thing? I hope Eric was kind. We'll find out. And of course he was. Not just kind, but very generous. And even some really good examples here. So this is a great example of how to use it for like dashboards or kiosks or what have you. So we want to allow anything from root. It's just like firewall rules, right? You have your allow and then you block after that or reverse. So we'll add that in. And this goes into company init just like all the other stuff did. Because that's where all our company settings go. So I'm going to put this under custom settings. All right, so that's the allow for root, so we don't just bork the entire system, because that would not be good. And then we're going to block a couple things. Now, I don't actually have these installed, so we'll just block some. I guess we'll prevent people from having fun. We'll do that. Yeah, because, nobody should be playing chess on a kiosk anyways, I suppose. All right, so we have that code there. It's basically saying allow root, but then block applications chess. Now, why do you need to allow root? I actually don't know off the top of my head, but I'm just going to trust Eric because I know he tested the crap out of this, and I know it's going to work. So we have that there. It's pretty clear we're blocking applications. Application access. We have a list, and then we have a path for the blacklist. So anything that's on that list will then be prevented from opening. And you'll even get the nice Apple UI for it. Oh yeah, and I don't know how this works in a VM. I've actually never tried it. Oh gosh, no. Go away. Oh gosh. Okay, so it opened, more or less. Oh no. It's not a strong password, okay? All right, and then check Facebook. Oh. Okay. So Chef's running. It's kind of boring. But as we get to the end, you'll see in green here, or, yeah, looks green. Install Mac DevOps Chef Application Access. And that tells us that that was changed. If I were to run this straight away again, it would not show in green because there's no new change. It's in the current state that it expects it to be in, blocking chess. So while that runs, we'll look in here and we'll take a peek at that. And you can see application restrictions profiles there. Chess is blocked. And is chess actually blocked? Yeah, because your admin hates you. So there we go. Although I have admin rights, so whatever. But all right, cool. So this is Chef running again, and you can see it's not green, but it's still here saying it's up to date. When it says up to date, it means that it's in the state it's expected to be in, and that state is the profile is installed. So if we want to add something else, why don't we do that, just for funsies? What do we even have? I don't know, iTunes. Who needs that with the cloud? All right, we'll just add that in here. Oh, doesn't always go how you want. There you go, cool. Sweet, so we have iTunes that app in there, run it, and it'll probably do exactly what we expect, although it didn't open iTunes first, so let's try to erase it. There we go, yeah, let me accept that EULA. Okay, well, we have the EULA, there we go. All good. And then Chef will run. Cool. And you'll see the profile got updated. It's green again. And the reason it's green again is we added something. If we go look in here, as expected, we now have iTunes listed. And if I spelled it right, it is blocked. There we go. Cool. So iTunes is now blocked. Although we don't really want to be jerks, so we'll just get rid of that. That's fine. Let's get rid of all the blocking. All the blocking. All right, cool. So let's see. Let's freestyle. Who wants to do what here? Although I can't do touch bar because I don't have that. I don't know if he has that one up here.
Smart card?
Smart card? I don't have a smart card, but we can look at it. I don't know. All right, so we can allow smart card, check certificate trust, one card per user, user pairing. Does this sound familiar? I don't know, I've never used these. Okay, cool, cool. So if we set these, which we can, which one should I do?
Well, unless you have a smart card, you're not going to notice anything from this, except for maybe the user pairing. You can pull the preference for that after setting it. So.
Oh, sure. There's a box. Chuck it. What's your face?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying. Oh, you had a question. Was just going to say that with the smart card, unless you have a smart card here, you're not really going to be able to see anything other than if you set the user pairing, we could check the smart card preference.
Awesome. Let's do
for
it.
that.
Let's do it. Did you have something else to say as well? You good?
Similar to that, actually. If we were to use those values in there that in the previous screen,
Yeah.
yes, where do we get these values? Do we have a list somewhere?
So everything listed here in attributes, those are the only ones supported today. So if you want more values added, the best way to do it is to yell at Eric. And the way to yell at Eric, you're welcome, if he's here, is to go to issues and submit a new issue and say, I need this setting, and then he may or may not do it. Or he may say pull request welcome. That's another popular thing to say.
Okay.
So, but if there's something missing that you need that's not here, it could definitely be added. It's just a matter of finding, convincing Eric or someone else that also needs it to do it, essentially. Do the work. But once it's done, and everything's happy. So here we go. Let's run it. And you'll have to guide me through checking on this, because I do not know where it goes. We can check the profile, I guess. Is there another preference that pops up? Or just the profile or defaults or?
Defaults.
Okay, cool. All right.
So it might be set by profile if you do it this way.
Ah, what did I forget to do? Anything, that's what I forgot to do. So, so if you ever forget, remember I forgot, live. And do I forget frequently? The answer is yes. Okay, cool. So we're gonna add it to Cookbooks. We have smart cards in here. So the Cookbook is now present, but we need to add it to init metadata, and then also to the macOS init. So we'll do that real quick. And Cookbooks, CP init, metadata, and how does the alphabet work? I think here. CP smart card. All right, so that depends. So that's telling us that CP init requires CP smart card in order to run, because it's expected. And then we will add to recipes, macOS. We will add that to the API list. And we'll just add it to the very top. Deal with it. It's not alphabetical. Smart card. Cool. And then a comma. So this is an array, so you do need a comma at the end of it if it's the first, if it's not the last element. But even in Ruby, you can just put a comma on there to be safe. So there's CP smart card. And that does match the name, right? I didn't dream it. Okay. So that's all there. So now we'll run Chef again, and we'll see if it actually does the management, which it should. Meanwhile, let's go find another fun one to play with. Okay, so that ran faster than I was expecting. There we go. So it installed a profile for Smart Card. If we go to Profiles, it'll pop in here, and it'll say Description, Password Policy, and Screensaver. Also worth mentioning, Eric's cookbooks are good cookbooks because they use the actual Apple payloads. A lot of ours still use the old MCX payloads, so it's still the old MCX subsystem. It's not the new MDM friendly payloads, but Eric's are all MDM friendly. So if you wanted to do this with Chef, you could, and they'd be MDM friendly. If you ever wanted to start pushing with an MDM, things would not blow up, and it would be lovely. So it's because it's the same exact payloads. Should work just fine. Is there anything else I should check, or is the profile good enough?
Yeah, that's good enough.
Cool, sweet.
And it actually just answered a question I had before about what mechanism you were using. So it sounds like for the MDM profiles, he's passing it to the profiles binary. When you guys are putting down, are you just writing a plist to manage preferences?
Ours are using the profiles binary as well.
Okay.
But it's the payload type. So there's a payload type of MCX payload, and there's a payload type that's like, if you go to the documentation, they have like a pretty key name,
Okay.
and they're not as nesty. And that's what Eric's using. Those are the properly documented and supported Apple payloads.
Cool.
It's not to say ours don't work, but these are the ones that we're probably going to be moving to some of his in the future. He actually migrated Screensaver from the old MCX style to the new Apple style.
Okay.
But that's a bit of an undertaking with 25,000 machines, so
Yeah,
we're a
and
little bit hesitant, yeah.
and either way is good. Writing down the plist, like if you're just doing a file system operation to the plist,
Yeah.
that confuses other management systems thinking that the
Yep.
profile's not installed. Yeah.
Yeah, we try to keep it to profiles because it is the way forward, and we could be shelling out to everything, but defaults, may exist in the future, may not. I don't know. I don't know anything specific about that, but we do know profiles are going to be fully supported. All right, let's pick another one. Oh, software update. This is one of the ones that I've been looking at. So you can actually allow pre-release installation using this cookbook because it's the official Apple one. So you want pre-release stuff? No problem. Want the beta on your fleet? Why not? Just don't install the 10.13 beta if you're bound to AD. Disclaimer. Don't ask how I know. Your machine will not boot. Cool. So it's basically a lot of the same. So we're going to, if we wanted to use any of these other ones, same process. Copy them from point A to point B, add them to the metadata so that it knows it depends upon it, add it to CP init so it gets applied, and then set the setting you want. The nice thing is, once you get your setup and you have all your API cookbooks all in there, I would just, if I were doing this, I would just copy paste the whole list, add them all to Meta, add them all to CP init, and then just forget about it. Just leave them all there, and then whenever you need them, they're there. And if you don't use them, it doesn't matter because they're not doing anything. So there's no setting set. No big deal. I don't know if any of these are especially magical. Oh, well, firewall. Whew. This one's exciting. So there we go. So you can manage firewall and add applications using bundle ID and allow true or false, depending on what you want. So you want to disable AirPlay. I've actually, this is my, to keep myself honest, this is the first time I'm looking at any of these because I wanted to go through it with you, you know, at the same time. And these are pretty thorough for what most settings are used, and I think that's what we tend to focus on as well. There's like a lot of niche settings that some people may need, but we don't necessarily need, so that's why it doesn't exist. So if you look at any of these cookbooks and there's something you need and it's not there, definitely put in an issue on either his, the Pinterest GitHub page or on the Facebook ITCPE GitHub page. And we have a couple issues already, so if you want to see people yelling at us, it's a good place to go. You can get an example. A lot of these are me yelling at myself because I figured out stuff was broken. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can find just poking around here. And you know, as I said, if I were to do this today, I would just dump all the API cookbooks in there and just add them all in a batch. If you're really handy with like find, replace, and macros and all that stuff, it'd probably be pretty easy, but I'd probably just be copying them all in. Let me take a look at this. I think on our side, oh yes, this one's worth calling out as well. Does anybody here use macOS Server? Yeah, so still, we still use it as well, and it's still extremely useful. So Nick has this magic that you can set up a macOS Server without any user interaction using Chef now. You just set these items and it just magic happens. It does it all command line. It asks you at command line if you want to accept the thing. It does it for you. So it's not interactive at all. He basically scripted around all that stuff. So you can actually just do any service or setting you want. And so very open-ended. So if there's a service that exists on macOS Server, the keys and values you use down here are exactly what you would see if you were using the command line command and just outputted the settings. So if you're doing SMB or whatever, it would be a key of SMB and then a value of whatever setting you want for that SMB service. We use this for setting up NetBoot worldwide and a lot of other fun stuff like that. Oh, caching too, I think. Yeah. So you can set it up, and then if you set manage to true, that's where the magic happens. Manage true makes sure that all the services are in the state that you say they are. So you can set all the services, but if you don't set manage true, it won't actually do it. The reason for that is there's a lot of code here, and it was easier to gate it on the manage in this case. Because it is a server, you want to be very explicit. Whereas with clients, it's like, you know. That's a really good one. And I believe, oh man, let's see. This is a lovely one. TeamViewer, no. And that'll just remove all the agents. That's actually not an API cookbook. You just include that and it kills TeamViewer, so be careful. Cool. Does anybody have any other general questions?
I noticed the profiles aren't signed.
Thank you. I forgot. Yes, you're right. They're not signed. That's correct.
The profiles aren't signed. Is that an issue, or is that okay to do?
Not for us. Apple was like, you signed your profiles, right? And we were like, no, and we're not going to. And they're like, oh, okay. You know, so that's how it went. We're just like, we're not doing it, so we're gonna do it when we have an MDM. But Chef is already encrypted end to end. So for us to encrypt something that's encrypted in an encrypted thing just doesn't make sense.
And speaking of what Apple wants you to do, I
Mhm.
mean, one of the themes of this conference that keeps coming up is the kinds of tools that we've been using are perhaps threatened by changes that are coming up.
Correct.
Since this is very powerful in terms of what it can tweak,
Yeah.
have you any sense of what's going to change or what's going to break going forward with Chef?
So, like an idiot, I installed 10.13 on my production machine an hour after it came out. It was great. I upgraded to beta 2. It wouldn't boot anymore, so I blew it away. I didn't know what was going. So all that to say, I test this stuff within an hour of it coming out, and I run Chef and I run it on my main machine. Unless it kills my machine, then I'm just sad. And I have my backup machine, but that's okay. But yeah, basically, there's a bug where if you're bound to AD and you install beta 2 or beta 3, it just won't boot anymore. So, yeah, it's in the release notes. Sorry, did I say that loud? Yeah, so it's pretty common. I don't think anybody's really surprised by stuff like that. You know, because AD has always been fun. But yeah, so all that to say, if any of this would stop being feasible, we would no longer do it. And we're still doing it, so take it from that what you will.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. Here we go.
Oh, watch your face. Okay.
Can you give us an example to run our own script?
Your own script. So what do you want to do with the script?
Whatever the script it has, it should run.
Okay, so with the design, with config management in general, the design theory is that running scripts is not inherently the best way to do it in general, right? So where this falls for me is I say, if I can't do it with the profile and I can't do it with defaults, then I'll use a command to do it. But even then, I do as little shelling out as I can. So in Chef, you can shell out, pipe it to a grep, pipe it to an awk, do whatever you want, but that's not the best way of doing it because Ruby's very powerful and you can just run the command, get all the output back, and then take action. Let me think if we can think of a good example of that. Oh, I don't have anything made for that because we don't manage our doc. But you know, scratch your own itches and all that. You could probably use DocUtil to be honest. You could probably write an abstraction for that and make a cookbook, and that would work really well. But you know, it's like nested plist-tel in there, and I just don't want to do that with Ruby. Okay. I am having a hard time thinking of these. I'll give you an example that'll make. It'll work. It's just not the best way to do it, I guess. So what I mean by that is you can do executes in Chef, and I'll show you what those look like. Chef executes look just like this. You can say, this is the name of what we're doing. It's the friendly name that pops up in the log when you run it, and then this is the command. So this is obviously on a Linux machine because you know a lot of the Chef folks are Linux folks. But oh, better. Cool. Ooh, too big. Here we go. All right. So you can actually have it run this command. The problem is when you do this, it'll run it every single Chef run, whether it needs it or not. And that's not great. So what you can do to help with that is you can say, oh, this file creates, this command creates this file on disk. And if that file exists, it won't run it.
Yes.
It's kind of like config management at that point. It's not, we try to make sure that the exact configuration inside the file is what we want it to be. So that's why we end up using like defaults and profiles and stuff of that nature. So this is everything that execute takes. I probably use like 3 of these. But yeah, it gets really complicated when you start digging in. But if you take the time to read through the docs, you can do some really cool stuff. So for instance, if we wanted to do a really simple example, you could do an execute block like this. And let me just, I'll make it up real quick in a file that isn't actually anywhere. But we could do something like this, where we could say, write preference. Please don't do this. This is a terrible example. I just want to put that out there. But it'll give you an idea of how it works. So I can't remember this ever. Right? It's plural. Okay. So we will do, and we will do a write, and we'll do, I'll just do some pseudocode here because I don't want to actually test it. So it'll be path to some plist, right? And then you'd say you want a key of my key to be set to true or what have you. So that's the command you would normally run at command line in order to write out that plist, or maybe without the .plist, either way. And then you would say something like this. You can guard it. This is called a guard. So you can actually take any config that we're doing here and make it so that it does not run if a certain condition is true. So what we do here is we'd flip this to write, or read rather. So it would run the command and read the key, and if it's there and it's true, it would not run that command. So you can actually do stuff like this, but I highly discourage it only because if you use the native management tools on macOS with Chef, it's a much better outcome in general. The only time we really do stuff at this level is with things that you can't manage with Apple frameworks like SSH and hosts and pathsd and stuff like that. But even then, we try to abstract it out so that it's easier to work with and less. Like if I typo this, it's broken. But if I write one cookbook that does this one piece of that config really well, so like say you have something in mind, like I'll just use pathsd as an example. If you write that out and it only manages that one file, you can make that really robust and make it work really well. So like if you add an entry, it'll make sure the entry's there and only do it if it's missing. And it'll look better than this too. And it will be more idempotent, meaning it won't do it if it doesn't need to be done.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Cool. Anyone else? Up here? Can someone throw the box? Thanks.
Could you talk briefly about how you handle more granular customizations, maybe on a group and user level? And
Sure.
Is there a common identifier you guys name machines by that is also used by Chef and Monkey, and how you deliver those customizations?
Gotcha. We do rename the machines to, I believe it's like username-MVP or something like that. You know, we have a function that just looks at the model, cuts the first letter off of each one, squishes it together and lowercases it. So we use that to name the machines. That code I probably can't show because that's in a cluster of other codes. But yeah, what you would do is you'd use a command like an exec and then do sutil get and sutil set. You'd use get to check it to see if it's correct. And then if it is correct, it's fine. If it's not, you would do the sutil set command, just like we did with that example. So that's a good example for the computer name. A lot of that stuff already exists. I'm not bound to AD, so I should be just fine. Oh yeah, here's a warning, and I know this bit at least one other person. If you have a large AD infrastructure and you run Chef, it will bork your system. Not bork it as in kill it, but it'll beach ball until you force restart it. And the reason is Ruby, the library that it's using to get all the users and groups, tries to enumerate the entire AD. So, not great. So one of the things we do, and I believe we have it in our configs here, but you can disable, it's called passwd. And I thought I called it out, but I may not have. Sorry, we're bunny trailing here, but whatever. It's all right. Let's see if ohai is in here. All right, can't be bothered. Yeah, we don't have that in there. We need to get it in there. But there's a in your client.rb, which is what you use to configure the client if you're using a server, you can say blacklist this ohai plugin, and you want to blacklist passwd. I actually got it to the point where I could open up Ruby, type one command, and it would just beach ball my system indefinitely because it's trying to enumerate everything. So it's upstream, and I couldn't figure out how to fix it, so we just bypass it. And they've been bypassing that forever. Okay, so where are we at? Oh, right, ohai. So when you run ohai, it already has data about your system, and this stuff is available. There we go. There's nades Mac. So this stuff is available in code. So I'll show you just a basic form of what we would do to scope stuff per, actually we have something just for this. There we go. So user customizations, recipes, default, and then there's actually an example in here. So what happens is when this runs, this is CP user customizations, when it runs, it looks at the currently logged in user. If there's a file that exists here that matches their username, it'll run any code in there for that user. So in this case, we have example. So this is Joe example or whatever. And if it's on macOS, we could then say something like node default CPE screensaver idle time, and we really hate Joe example, so he has an idle time of 1 second. You know, he can't stop working. If he does, that screensaver is going on, and he's locked. So this will only apply to a user who has the name of example. So the name of the file is example. That has to match the username. If it matches, it runs this code on that person's machine. I use this for my own machine and for my own settings. Let me see if I can grab that real quick, actually, because that would probably be a much more reasonable example. Just pops on the screen. Okay. Cool. All right, let me just grab this real quick and I'll get it to you. All right, sweet. So this is my personal config that runs on my machine and all of my machines. Nice thing is my username is the same on any machine I log into. So when I logged back onto my old machine, all my settings were still there because I ruined my new machine. Whoa, that's a YubiKey. There we go. So, cool. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding host entries for my own machine because if you're not doing secure updates with Windows DNS, it's a painful life to live sometimes. So I set that so when I try to get to my own machine, I can get to it by name. Idle time is 300, a little bit more aggressive. And Spotlight, for some reason, is really fixated on the Dart client. And I just want AnyConnect. I don't want the stupid Dart client. You know, I want that. So every time I would pop it up, I would open Dart by accident because it would be the first thing in the list. So I just blacklist that thing because I just don't even want it on there. And thankfully, the installer is now further down on the list. Otherwise, I was going to have to black hole that too and get it out of there. But yeah, so that's an example of something that runs on mine. It would be more adventurous and show you maybe Mike's, but I don't know what he has in there right now. But you could manage anything for a user. You could manage.
So do you guys use Chef Server to handle groups then? Is that how you're doing it?
So we manage Chef. We use the Chef Server, but we use it in a very dumb mode. It doesn't do anything for us. All it does is sync the cookbooks down and make sure the clients are getting the latest configs, and that's it. We don't use the groups. We don't use any of the OHI data. We ship like maybe 10 items of OHI back to the server. And the reason for that is we have 25,000 machines on one server. And, well, a pair, but still. If I were to ship a ton of OHI data, we'd probably need more servers. And we don't need the data because we're using it all locally anyways. So we scope on it locally. So for instance, you could, for instance, say you had, all right, so you say you have Active Directory. You could look up a user's record in AD on macOS, and then you could stuff it into an attribute in Chef. So you could have like person, and then groups or AD groups. So you would have to write this, but you could write something that, you know, does an LDAP search or whatever, or a DSCL, and gets that data and puts it into an attribute. And then later, anywhere else in your code, you could say, if node AD group equals some test group, you know, they get macOS whatever.
We can't slide that over.
Oh, sorry. Well, that took a while to tell me. Thanks. So if you could do, you could build your own attribute data, which is one of the beauties of Chef. You can run anything. So if you have like a AD server or an HTTP server or whatever, you can query it using native Ruby and then use that data for your nodes. So I can get all my information. For instance, we have one called person, and I can figure out which groups I'm in. So I'm in one called Trusted Testers. So anybody in Trusted Testers gets all the early release of all the software, we get it before anyone else does, so we break before they do. And then once it gets out of that group, we basically have something that says, deployed to this group, and then after like a week, it'll just roll it over to the other group, to the rest of the company, and then just push it out. So that way, if we don't hear enough yelling in the first week, we assume it's okay and just push it out. So that's one way you could do it. You could get groups, put them in here, and then use them for deciding what configuration is going where. And this stuff works exactly the same as up here. So if you're scoping on group, you take any API cookbook. Oops, I think I had the internet. There we go. And you could set something like this. Yeah. There we go. You set something like this and have an idle time, like say you have finance or whatever, they're doing some stuff that you don't want people to get into if they leave their screen unlocked. So they have, I don't know. Well, let's be a little bit nicer. We can do, 3,600 seconds or whatever. Give them an hour, or make it even shorter, whatever. You can make it whatever you want it to be for that group. So as it's running on the machine, it's aware of what they are if you have the data. You could even use DSCL to look at it locally, but it'd probably be better to cache it instead of running DSL every chef run, because that would get pretty old. Okay, so it looks like we have just a few minutes. Any other questions? We can do one more.
Because my question is, were you guys using Puppet before and then went to Chef, or what is the benefit between one and the other?
Gotcha. So no, Facebook has never used Puppet as far as I understand. They were a Casper shop, and then they went to Chef. Basically, the contract was expiring, so it was and oh crap, let's quickly move everything over to Chef, that sort of thing. So the contract was expiring, and Mike rushed to get everything over to Chef, and then basically we've been refining it ever since and making it do everything we needed to do. And a lot of this stuff, if the patterns are almost identical to like extension attributes and gating it based on smart group and all that. The ideas are almost always the same across any tool. It's just a matter of what it looks like in the code or in the interface.
I know there's a tool that helps convert Chef into Puppet. It has to be like DSL. I don't know what Chef DSL
Chef is
means.
DSL, yeah.
Is your code DSL?
Our code is pure. It's actual Ruby, and then so Chef is a DSL, which is a language that's derived off of Ruby. But Chef is Ruby. But on top of that, they add their own classes. Like when we do execute or like a file resource or a package resource, that's a Ruby function. So you're just calling a function that does the thing. So that's the difference. Cool. I think we're good then? Anyone else? Anyone else? Cool. One more. Oh no, not Flurry.
Everybody.
Nice. Do you have any experience with Chef on PC?
Yes. So we do Chef on PC, and we're actually starting to buff up some of those cookbooks. So if we look here, yeah, Chrome does both. Yeah, that's true. That's right. I forgot about that. We made that cross-platform. We have Choco if you use Chocolatey, and this allows you to install apps. Basically, all it does is it writes out a JSON file to disk that Chocolatey then consumes. So it's like we have a list of things to install. Chocolatey runs and says, "Oh, yeah, these things to install," so it does it. I think this actually runs Chocolatey too, so it feeds it directly there and then runs it in line with the Chef run. We don't do that with Monkey. With Monkey, we have local only manifest, which is a file on disk, but it's very similar in a lot of ways. And then we really want to get like CP Screensaver to be cross-platform. We want that to be 100%, Linux, Windows, and macOS all in the same thing. You set that one attribute, and if it runs on a different platform, it just knows what to do. So on Windows, it'll fiddle with the registry. On Mac, it'll install a profile. On Linux, I don't know. It'll do something, but it'll set the screensaver timeout. But yeah, we're not there yet, but we're working towards that. And I know there's a bunch of people that have a similar interest, because while we do have 25,000 Macs, we also have 5,000 PCs, and we can't just say, "Hey, have a terrible experience. You're welcome." We can't do that. So, although we may have experienced that, we care about user experience, so that's how it goes. All right, cool. I think we're good. But you can catch me after, and we can have a chat.